Chapter 18.
"May I have your attention?"
said the Grand Council Coordinator. The assembly of the Grand Council was rather boisterous and noisy up to that point. The arrival of the human 5 days ago was certainly unexpected, and was the subject of much discussion and debate. That this human was as refined and docile as he was completely astonished one and all. Previously, all of New Galimar adopted a rather isolationist viewpoint. When they arrived on this planet several thousand years ago, they came in contact with humankind, but humans at that time were comparatively primitive and barbaric. The Galimarians decided it would not be wise to interfere with this indigenous population and risk the possibility of human social contamination. The main reason for this had to do with very negative events found in the history of the Galimarians, and the testimonial law which prohibited the dissemination of technology to civilizations less advanced than their own. If the society was extremely less evolved than their own, the Galimarians would avoid interaction altogether. They had been to enough new worlds to see there was a normal timeline all civilizations followed in their advancement. When they first landed on Earth and came into contact with humans, the Galimarians figured it would take humans another 15,000 years to get to a point that even merited the first contact, let alone any kind of technological exchange. But here was living proof that humans had advanced far faster than anything the Galimarians had ever seen. How this could possibly have happened was the subject of hot debate among the Grand Council, and the theories abounded. One theory was a possible contamination of the humans by the family of Docius Atlantis. About 3,000 years ago, Docius and his family wanted to leave the island of New Galimar and live on the mainland of Eden. The Grand Council allowed this to occur, but only on the conditions that they not take any technology with them and swear never to reveal the existence of the island. Proponents held that Docius must have not only revealed the existence of the island, but also spawned a renaissance of some sort, allowing humans to advance far faster than normal. Another theory involved a possible landing by other alien civilizations not as enlightened as New Galimar, nor as responsible in dealing with primitive civilizations. This wouldn't be the first time they had seen this happen. They had witnessed this transpiring with civilizations living in their home galaxy, not the Milky Way. Although a minority, there were still others who claimed it might have been possible humans did progress faster than normal, simply because they had a much more versatile brain. In support of their theory, they cited the fact that human physiology is essentially identical to that of the Galimarians, except for some very minor differences. There weren't many who put stock in that theory, but still, it was an interesting idea. The Grand Council coordinators spoke again, once the overall clatter of conversation slowed to a stop.
"We have all gathered together in an emergency session of the Council to discuss the topic of the human who has come ashore. In the published agenda, the first speaker of this session is Giuseppe Ucol. As you all know, Giuseppe was part of the original landing party here on Eden, and is responsible for inspiring the architecture of the government here on New Galimar. I'd now like to invite Giuseppe Ucol to the podium."
Being the oldest living Galimarian on New Galimar, Giuseppe Ucol was an extremely respected member of society. As he approached the podium, all in attendance stood in honor of the living legend, and applause broke out. When he reached the podium, Giuseppe motioned for all to return to their seats. "Please, my brothers and sisters, you honor me far too much," were his first words. The rest of the council continued to applaud for another 10 seconds, but eventually they ceased and took their seats. "I thank you for that warm reception," said Giuseppe. "I hope I meet someone someday who actually deserves all that." There was general laughter at his modesty. "My fellow council members, we meet here today to discuss a matter truly without precedent. It reminds me of the days when we first came to this planet. There were many here who remember those days as well as I do. How we all were in great disarray after the realization that everything from our home planet had been left far behind, and we didn't know what our future held. We eventually realized the uncertain nature of our futures wasn't a curse, but rather a blessing. Our very society, both on our home planet of Galimar, as well as here on Eden, is a society based on the deep and long-lasting enjoyment we derive from the simple acts of exploration and discovery. It was during those early days here on this planet when we discovered there was no greater manifestation of exploration than a galaxy none of our forefathers had ever seen. We realized we were at the forefront of a great odyssey of discovery. The arrival of our unexpected human visitor has ushered in feelings of uncertainty and angst. But let me remind you, this is only another chapter in the ever-unfolding events of our new life in our new home. Yes, it was unexpected that humans progressed far faster than we anticipated, and I have heard some of the theories as to why this happened. Regardless of how this may have occurred, the fact remains. It has indeed happened. It is impossible to go back in time to change anything that might or might not have occurred. So I encourage you all, my friends, to consider embracing what we have seen to be the truth. Instead of being uneasy, learn more about it so we can be brokers to their continued development. If this has happened without the intervention of others, then it behooves us to learn as much about them as possible, since advancement at this rate means they will end up far beyond us in no time at all. As always, sessions of the Grand Council meetings were being broadcast all around the island, including the newly set-up hospitals suddenly popping up everywhere to handle a strange outbreak of coughing sickness which was sweeping the entire population. As all listened to Giuseppe's words, they could see the wisdom he employed when they first came to the planet was alive and well in this walking icon. His words were calming and reasonable. "My brothers and sisters," Giuseppe continued, "it occurs to me this is a classic example of one of the axioms I proposed while still on Galimar. I am from all that I think. As I explained at that time, all Galimarians can think. Simply deciding what we eat each morning is a function of thought. But producing thought that guides what the individual wishes to be, even if that thought is contrary to current reality, has the effect of causing one to make all decisions guided and navigated by desires pursuant to that thought, building a new reality for that person. This is essential to the meaning of life. Ultimately, we create our own realities. I put to each and every one of us this question: what is the reality that you wish to create with these new circumstances? Let us consider the options. One is to eliminate what some may think is a threat to our culture and way of life. Would any of us consider this? Of course not. As the enlightened society we are, there would be no way any of us would ever consent to such a backward sleight of ethics. Another option would be to send this person home with no further interaction with us. Is this viable? Perhaps his contemporaries would think he was spinning a less than credible yarn of lies, which deserves no credence. That might all be well and good, but after several interviews with the human, who calls himself Jose, it appears humans have become extensive seafarers. Unfortunately, I must now be the bearer of bad news, and disclose that it is more than likely many humans have run into our force field shield and died because of it. The revealing of this fact took the breath away from most of the population of New Galimar. If they weren't doing so already, all sat back in their seats and felt an immense sense of grief at the knowledge they may have unknowingly been the architects of the death of untold number of human seafarers. The din of chatter which suddenly broke out in the council chamber was reflected throughout New Galimar. For a few moments there was complete disarray in the chambers, and it was difficult for Giuseppe to get things back to order. "Council members," called Giuseppe, holding up his open hands, coughing once or twice and clearing his throat. He called out again, "Council members, please come to order." It took some time for the council chambers to return to order. Eventually, Giuseppe was able to continue speaking. "I know this is an assault to our values, and all of us would change what has happened if we could. But what has happened in the past remains and cannot be changed. What can change is what we do about it from this moment on. I would like to make a motion that we change our policy of isolation and establish first contact with this culture." Looking out at the faces of the present council members, there seemed to be a compendium of acceptance. Most of the heads in the audience were nodding. Giuseppe looked over to the council coordinator, but the expression was one that didn't reflect a lot of positivity. At that point, the coordinator came over to the podium and spoke.
"Council members, I personally agree with Giuseppe on his proposed motion. However, I am forced to point out that testimonial law dictates all council members must vote on any motions put forth. Normally, this is exactly what we would do at this time. However, as can be seen from the vacant seats in the council chambers, only 37 of the 51 council members are present, due to the sickness sweeping through the island. Since we cannot take a vote on this motion, is there anyone who can suggest what we should do with the human named Jose, until all council members return to health?"
A murmur across the council chambers could be heard for a few moments until one member stood up.
"The chair recognizes the council representative of the district of Meropa,"
said the coordinator. "Thank you," said Yonan Brindu. "The issues raised today are certainly serious, and if they necessitate reevaluating certain tenets of our testimonial law, as it applies to the indigenous life forms found on this planet, known as human, then I will not oppose such discussion. As has been pointed out, several members of the council are missing from these proceedings as a result of the unprecedented sickness sweeping through our population. Even I seem to be coming down with a cough, which seems to be characteristic of this malady. Due to all this, I have a proposal to put forth as to how we should handle the human." Yonan turned to the rest of the council members. "My brothers and sisters, it is apparent we must come to a decision as to what is to be done with this Jose as soon as possible, for the longer we delay on deciding what to do, the greater risk there is for more humans to be killed by our shield. I have some ideas as to what the alternatives might be, but whatever the possible alternatives may be, there can be no decision until the entire body of the council is present. I propose we place the human into a stasis chamber until we are all able to meet again and decide what is to be done. While it is unlikely we will delay the decision any longer than is necessary, It is not a service to the human to make him wait until we resolve whatever seems to be ailing us all. The proceedings in the council chambers were being broadcasted to all of New Galimar, including the home Jose had been temporarily given. Sitting next to Jose was a cultural attaché who had been assigned to him when he arrived. The role of the attaché was to help Jose acclimatize to life on the island and answer any questions. Jose did have a simple question. "What is this stasis chamber?" The attaché replied, "It is a machine where you will sleep. The sleep is so deep you won't remember time going by, and when we revive you, days, weeks, or even months will have gone by and you won't know it." For a moment, Jose was silent as he digested this piece of information. The idea of a stasis chamber sounded an awful lot like a prison to him, and he vowed a long time ago he would never step foot into another prison. He made that vow to his late mother when he got into a little bit of trouble when he was young. Around the time he was 8 or 9 years old, Jose had begun to rebel against society because all his friends had fathers and he didn't. He hadn't thought about the effect this would have on his mother, and when it became apparent his course of life was causing severe emotional pain to a woman who had been through so much already, Jose vowed to her that he would stay out of trouble. He never wanted to cause pain to his mother, and it destroyed him to think this was exactly what he was doing. For this reason, the prospect of being a prisoner for an untold amount of time was very distasteful. He started formulating a plan to escape from the island. Jose had no way of understanding that if he tried to leave, he would run into the same shield that killed his father, only from the inside this time. Back in the Grand Council chambers, the proposal was put to a vote. A change to testimonial law required the full complement of council members to vote. Something like this particular motion only required a simple majority, and, since 37 of the 51 were present, this was possible. The vote passed, and plans for putting Jose in stasis the next morning began. Jose resolved he wouldn't submit to what he interpreted as a prison. For the rest of the day he mentally prepared for his escape. He felt the best chance he had to escape would be during the night. He had no idea what night vision cameras were, so he had no idea his escape would be easily seen by island security forces. The home where Jose was staying had been completed earlier that month by builder robots. It was a beautiful home, really. Under different circumstances, he wouldn't mind actually living there on a more permanent basis. Normally, the inhabitant of this home would move in shortly after his or her ceremony of enlightenment. Part of getting a new home like this was also the experience of being given an amulet of understanding. The amulet sat in a cradle atop the computer screen Jose had been watching. As he made mental preparations for his departure that night, Jose thought about what he would say when he got back home. He could tell whomever he came into contact with about this amazing civilization that rescued him from floating on the ocean, but who would believe him? Jose was wise enough to know that nobody would believe him unless he had some sort of proof. As he was pondering these things, his eyes rested on the amulet sitting on top of the screen. A slight smile crossed his lips when he decided the amulet would be his proof of visiting such an amazing place. He was going to steal the amulet. Eventually, night came. Before they went to bed, Jose's companion, who had been assigned to him, acted like being in prison like that was a great thing. Strange. Whatever the opinion of others might be, Jose's mind was made up. He was leaving, and there was no changing his mind once it had been made up. Jose didn't know this, but in this way he was very much like his father. Jose laid under the covers in full clothing, so he could make his getaway quickly and quietly. He laid in bed for at least 2 hours to ensure his companion was completely asleep. After some time, Jose looked over and was able to determine he was completely asleep. Now was the time to go. Quietly, Jose stood up next to his bed. As he passed through the main living area, he paused next to the computer monitor and deftly slipped the amulet into his coat pocket. Emerging from the front door, he avoided any areas of the city that were lit, eventually making his way to the dock where his small dinghy was kept. Quietly sliding into the boat, he pushed out to sea. As the shoreline became more and more distant, it gradually occurred to him this wasn't a very well thought-out plan. Where would he go? How would he survive on the open ocean for an untold amount of time? If it weren't for the inhabitants of this island finding him when they did, he would no doubt be a lifeless carcass floating on the open ocean by now. It took another 10 minutes to realize he was without a choice. He had nowhere to go. It was either spend time in an uncertain prison on New Galimar and still be alive, or spend a relatively short amount of time on the open ocean and most certainly die of starvation and dehydration. There was only one decision to make, so he decided to turn back. Little did he know, had he made that decision about 45 seconds later, the shield would have completely destroyed both him and his boat. There would only be small shards of the boat left, and there would be nothing of Jose. Turning the boat around, he made for shore again. He took his coat off to row harder, and, in doing so, the amulet in his coat pocket silently dropped out and sank into the water. A passing dolphin saw it floating down and snagged it with its nose, enjoying it as a temporary plaything. That amulet continued to be the occasional plaything to sea creatures far and wide who came to be interested in it due to its magnetic properties or its ever-shiny carapace. For centuries, it continued to move around on the sea floor due to such passing interests. It wouldn't be seen again by air-breathing creatures until around 600 years later, when it magnetically attached itself to the dredging hook of a ship laying transcontinental cable in the North Atlantic. Meanwhile, a tragedy quickly played itself out on the island of New Galimar. Jose returned and was placed in a stasis pod for safekeeping until the entire Grand Council of New Galimar could meet again, which it never did. As time went by, the scientific minds of New Galimar worked in vain to counteract the advancing waves of sickness that slowly but surely took hold of the island. As well versed as they were with handling sicknesses common to their people, the sickness Jose brought with him seemed to require a type of anti-biological warfare they simply weren't prepared for. Given enough time, their past interactions with other planets and species would have been enough to guide the creation of a treatment plan. Unfortunately, some of the best minds who would have created such treatment plans were the first to succumb to the epidemic. This saddled others much less experienced in this type of medicine with the terrible responsibility of finding a cure to save all on the island. They made progress, but it ended up being woefully too little, too late. The sickness Jose originally brought to the island continued to spread unabated. Eventually, all members of New Galimar succumbed. Except for the caretaker robotics that ensured the parks and buildings were all cared for, there was no movement or sound found anywhere. New Galimar became completely peaceful and quiet, and would remain that way until a beautiful and innocent archaeologist from New York changed everything. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.